Excellent. You know what, Godfrey, can you go back one slide, please? Excellent. We'll do introductions here actually as people are coming in, because everyone sort of knows the score. So first off, welcome again. My name is Allison Henry. Many of you know me, but not everyone knows me. But I am a resident of Pasadena. I'm on the Pasadena Rental Housing Board as an at-large member. That sounds really good to say. I'm a tenant advocate, housing advocate, and I'm the SGV San Gabriel Valley, for those of you who are guests to our Freeway Mountain Bowl, SGV Housing Justice Organizer. Welcome. I'm joined tonight by some, in fact, probably most of you are amazing people. Joined tonight by Brian Calderon-Tabatabai, who is the Mayor Pro Tem for West Covina, as well as Adele Andrade-Stadler, who is the Mayor of Alhambra, beloved Alhambra, and a colleague, Deputy Director, and just great fellow organizer, Godfrey Plata. We're here. You're going to hear from everyone, but I want to give Godfrey in particular this chance because Godfrey is my fellow bus driver, and I'd like to give him a chance to say hello and welcome everyone, since some of you may know him.
Thanks, Allison. Hi, everybody. I'm Godfrey, he, him, his. I am based in Koreatown, but I'm learning so much about the San Gabriel Valley from Allison and all of the folks that she's building community around and with in the SGV to ensure that we're living in a more just world all across LA County. Super excited to learn from you all here tonight. There's a lot that I know even folks outside of the SGV are hoping to learn from work and challenges and opportunities that are happening in the SGV. So it's not just the SGV taking and learning from other cities, we are learning from you all about the work that you are doing, and super excited to do so. So thank you for the welcome, Allison.
Right on. Well, without any ado, let's go ahead and move through it so we can hear from the real stars of this. So if you haven't already, please put in the chat your name, your city, priority, housing issue, and again, any contact information you wish to share. All right, next slide, please. So we did some introductions. We're going to do some additional framing. And some of that's going to come through the 3 Ps of housing. This is our agenda. We're going to go over some regional stats quickly. To most of you, this will not be new information, right? And then like what the main event, ding, ding, but we're not fighting, we're talking. It's going to be the panel discussion with Brian Calderon-Tabatabai, Mayor Pro Tem of West Covina, and Adele Andrade-Stadler, of Mayor of Alhambra. So next slide, please. Oh, so yeah, so sorry, got them slightly out of order. But just want to say before we move on, for those of you in the San Gabriel Valley in particular, this is like, if you haven't gotten the memo already, LA Forward, despite the name LA Forward, we are trying to move, mobilize, play, inform in the San Gabriel Valley. The mission statement of LA Forward is to build a community of people who fight for policies that will make LA County, cities flourish, and flourish for everyone. And we have a unique opportunity in the San Gabriel Valley because we are resource poor but need heavy. We operate in the valley, in the shadow of Los Angeles City. And I don't say that disparagingly. I say that with some envy, in that LA City offers things to residents that many of our other cities can't or won't. But it also means LA City has a community of people already moving and mobilizing at LA City Council in ways that we're hoping to replicate in the San Gabriel Valley, right? I grew up in the San Gabriel Valley. I grew up in Claremont. I live in Pasadena, like I had said at the start of this. I'm on the rental housing board. I've been a tenant advocate for a long time. I'm not going to say the years anymore because I'm just like trying to feel young, y'all. But with that, we'll go ahead and move through some sort of basic framing of how we're going to talk about housing. So this is animated, Godfrey. So I'm going to see if anyone can put in the chat, or even if some of our panelists, when we think about housing and it's a big problem, we have to come up with a framework, right? So the framework that's an easy shorthand are the 3 Ps. So I'd be curious from our 2 panelists actually, but also in the chat, because we have 30 people in the Zoom. What are the 3 Ps of housing, and how do they work together? So that's the first question. What are the 3 Ps of housing, and how do they work together? It looks
As
like
a
you, is your hand up, Brian?
Is mine up? I don't think so. As a teacher, I don't want to just give the answer away. Wanted to give people a chance, but I can start off. I think the one we always talk about is production. So that is one of the P's.
Okay, thank you very much. Mayor Adele, the full equity? Yep.
Sure. The one of the three P's is protection of tenants.
Boom. Very nice. Excellent. And Godfrey, I'm going to put you on the spot. Full equity.
All right, juggling sharing slides as well. I heard production, I heard protection, and so preservation of affordable housing is also one that makes up the 3 Ps.
Excellent. So if you click on the next slide, we'll have those as answers. Excellent. And so when we think about like some of the examples of each, we heard that kind of come up already, right? Tenant protections, right? And we're going to be talking about some examples of each, but you know, we've got one, right? The protection P. Thank you, Mayor Adele, because in your answer, you gave us the example too. Bet you were top of the class in school. So Brian, for your P, production, can you give us an example of like how this works, or why we know this P, and what part it plays in policy?
Yeah, all cities currently, or those of us who have not gotten approval yet by the state, have been working on our housing element. So the state gave us our RENA numbers in West Covina. In the next 8 years, we need to build roughly 6,000 units of housing. And so, all cities, which is the way it should be, have a responsibility to produce enough housing for the population of the state of California. And so, it is front of mind. It is, probably priority number one for many cities in the San Gabriel Valley is, where's the space, what type of developments, and how can we produce all of the types of housing we need, right? All the different income levels. I know we'll talk more about this, but just a quick example. In West Covina Unified, we just lost 5 teachers at one of our high schools, first and second year teachers, because they could not afford to live in West Covina. They couldn't afford to live near the city of West Covina. And so because we have not produced enough of a variable amount of housing, we lose, people that really work and make our community better. And so the production is not just produce the 6,000 units, but produce a variety of units at all different income levels.
So thank you for that. And we're actually going to get a little bit more into some of those stats. So that's actually great. RENA, for those of you who don't live and breathe housing, is regional housing needs assessment. Now, Brian, like, welcome to the world, right, of living and breathing housing. It's the requirement for cities, and we'll go over that in a little minute, but it's the production piece, right? It's the expectation of building. So thank you for sharing that. And Godfrey had said preservation. So thank you. And I'll add as examples, we have in our housing element, which Brian mentioned, plans and information about housing. I pulled the housing element information for Alhambra and West Covina around the units of affordable housing that are at risk of going to market rate. And in Alhambra, and don't worry, I'll share this with you all afterwards, but in Alhambra, there are 215 units that are at risk of going to market rate. Now, the city is obviously on this somehow, right? And we can ask Mayor Adele as we speak with her, but it's identified as program 3 in the housing element, right? So even in the framework of state mandated plans, the 3 Ps are kind of used. And in West Covina, Bryan City, there's one deed restricted building that's at risk of reverting to market rate, meaning, right, again, tenants are paying lower than market rate. They're usually senior buildings, low income buildings, family buildings. It has 84 units and it's at risk of going to market rate. But it's identified as program 1.2 in the city of West Covina's housing element, which means, again, it's at least on the city's radar for what to do about it. So this is great. So let's go ahead and go to the next slide. So moving away from the framework, let's look at some of the data real quick, because some of it's been referenced and it'll provide sort of a filling out of this sort of metaphysical existential 3 Ps. So let's go ahead and take a look. So the first city we're going to look at is Alhambra. What I have pulled is from the SoCal Regional Atlas, done by the Southern California Association of Governments, okay? And we're looking at what's called the housing dashboard. Brian and Adele have both seen this because I have sent it in with letters to their cities, so they have seen it. You can see that, you know, Alhambra is 60 to 61%, as we'll learn in some data, renter occupied units, right? So that's, as we know, and we'll hear Mayor Adele talk about, you know, we know that's a reality. We also know that the folks in Alhambra are significantly rent burdened, which means they pay a significant amount of their income, 50% or more, on rent or housing, but we'll call it rent. And I show you this also, like, as we all come together, many of you have seen this as we've worked together, but many of you haven't. When you come to people or cities or institutions, this data, people can't really argue with it. It's slightly out of date in that it's like before the pandemic, but it's still reliable and actionable and considered good for purposes of creating state mandated planning documents. All right. So in looking at this and looking at an economic picture of Alhambra, right? Okay, this is what it looks like. You know, we've got 14% of households below the poverty line. My apologies for some of the type being difficult to read, but the bowl and the hand and the food coming in, that's a lot. So when we look at this data, we go to the next slide, because we'll do this a little quickly because we can do this for every city. What Brian was talking about in terms of housing production goals, meaning every city or every part of unincorporated counties are to get their fair share of housing and do X number of housing, the RHNA numbers. They break them down into incomes. And I show people this because there is a significant misalignment even in our production goals at the income targets. And that's not to throw shade on RHNA, but rather as an additional reason for people to lean into data and to lean into your councils and county to try and better align these building goals with the current economic data of your city. But I also raised this because production ain't even going to get us there. If we're only relying on one of the P's, you will see through this presentation that it won't work. And so it's another critical way to push back on a production only approach, which denies very easy preservation and protections for cities that aren't doing it right now that should. And as we'll hear, some of them are already doing it. So next slide, please, Godfrey. So looking at equally at West Covina, you know, West Covina is an interesting city. It's literally a bedroom community, right? It's literally suburbia in a way that Alhambra isn't. Alhambra has actually got a lot of beautiful, charming, infill housing and bungalow courts. You know, if you haven't driven through Alhambra and checked out the housing and checked it out, please, it's a beautiful city. West Covina, you know, we've got 35% of the city are in renter occupied housing units, and it's a little bit larger at 3.24 people. I raised that because many of these people might be in one bedroom apartments, and it's obviously having an impact on one part of the school district. 8% of households are below the poverty line, right? So a good note. Lower than Alhambra, but I think people would always be surprised reflecting on the internal poverty of the city. Next slide, please, Godfrey. So in this scenario of, you know, smaller tenant city, you know, we still have, again, the RENA number that you see in the little houses on the bottom of your screen. They are, you know, the income levels. The highest number, single income production numbers for above moderate income. And it just doesn't align with the economic data. This is not the only, these aren't the only cities to have these issues, by the way, but a good snapshot of our region. Next slide, please. So that's some of the skew of what your cities look like between owners and tenants, because there's voting implications for that too, right? But we just want to look at quickly, you know, like just other data that's more current. And these are February stats from Rent Cafe, and, you know, trying to do apples to apples. But I think we would all agree there's we're closing in on the dollar difference between locations. But this is just really interesting. Again, there's the rent burden data. You know, for West Covina, it's 28% of tenants paying half their income, with an average rent of $2,300. That's actually really expensive. When I saw that today, I was like, what? And you know, what's interesting is per the Rent Cafe data versus the SCAG data, we've actually seen an uptick in the number of tenants. Not a surprise, but just something to point to as we're seeing change over time. And you know, this is interesting. Alhambra's kind of stayed the same in terms of renter tenant percentage per Rent Cafe, but the cost is very expensive. $2,500 for average rent. And again, almost a third of the city paying half of their income on rent. Next slide, please. So the other piece of data is just the homeless count. I would imagine everyone on this call has actually, or Zoom, has interacted with or heard this data in some capacity. So we'll keep it brief, but it was a 9% increase. We've got 75,000 people minimum on the streets, minimum. Affordability is the major driver of homelessness. This is key to changing narratives. We have a project that's attempting to go in an unincorporated LA County at 740 East Foothill, 43 units for senior folks who have experienced homelessness. And the city folks of San Dimas and Laverne, some city folks have pushed back. Thankfully, we had folks speaking in favor of the project of National Core, but this is data that we need to remember. It's affordability, and if you're senior, you're on a fixed income. And we see this in the data. A double-digit increase in senior homeless. We did see, depending on what question you're asking, that's why I didn't put the percentage here. You did see an increase in just overall first-time homelessness. And the most notable increase, which I think we should pay attention to when we're thinking about policy for our cities that are suburban places where people have cars and parking is an issue. The biggest group of people we saw in terms of like dwelling type, if you can call a car a dwelling, which we have to, 23,000 people, an increase of 20. That's almost a small town. You're within 10,000 people of towns like Claremont living in their cars, like an increase of that, right? I included our spa number. It's not a spa like relaxing spa. It's a service provision area, which the county is divided into. It's handy to know this shorthand, because when you're talking with advocates or offices, you can reference this data. This excludes the city of Pasadena because city of Pasadena has its own continuum of care that does its own homeless count, and it's like its own little bubble. It's pretty typical for my lovely town of Pasadena. So it means that this increase of 348 people is for all the other cities in the San Gabriel Valley outside of Pasadena. So with that, I've given everyone a lot of facts and stats and some things to, I hope, chew on. So let's go ahead and dive into this discussion. And I'm going to do a little bit more formal introduction of our guests so everyone knows exactly kind of how they came to this, but I'd also like to give you all like a minute to tell your own story, right? Because if anything is true about the housing movement is we speak for ourselves, right? So I'd like to first welcome Mayor Adele Andrade-Stadler. She is the mayor, and she is a council member in Alhambra representing District 5. She was first elected to council in 2018. She's a California local and native. She's got an advanced arts degree she's from East LA City College, attended Cal State LA as well as Pacific Oaks here in Pasadena. And she's had a lot of nonprofit and consultative experience. She has also served on the Alhambra Unified School District, so definitely brings in an educational, educator, student-based approach, which has really manifested in policy. She's also currently the vice chair of LA County Department of Social Services. Again, another key intersection. A rampant volunteer. She volunteers with the Alhambra Latino Association, Chinese Citizen Alliance of Los Angeles chapter, LAMP Optimist, the Parent Teacher Association, and she's been a transportation commissioner for the city of Alhambra. And she's definitely been recognized most recently as the Congresswoman Judy Chu's 2014 Woman of the Year. She's got a family, a husband, Joe Stadler, and a daughter, Ramona. And welcome, Mayor Adele.
Thank you.
May I give you a minute to introduce yourself before I then
Sure.
go on to Mayor Brian? Thank you.
Thank you so much for inviting me here today. I'm quite honored to be speaking to our community via LA Forward, which is just an incredible organization, really working to help move housing forward, move responsible affordability housing forward. I just wanted to say that I'm excited to talk to you after I am currently the chair and have been the chair of the Department of Social Services Commission. And we have a whole section that is working with the homeless and the housing. And so I want to connect you with them as well to give you more data that I think is important when you're raising the issues of the increase of senior homelessness. So one of the things I think that stands out the most, and yeah, I know you're only giving me a minute, but was when I came in 14 years on the school board and then now serving as a council person and mayor, of course, second time mayor. It was that mutual aid that came about from a whole lot of us during 2020. And I'm just proud to say that those of us in that collaborative, which included teachers from the Alhambra Teachers Association, parents and students and elected officials, we created this mutual aid for San Gabriel Valley. And we were the first ones to do an emergency order before the county and the state to freeze all rent during 2020 when we were hit in March. And I have to thank legal aid for helping us do that. But that's what propelled me to go into this particular area of policy and get to know my community better. So thank you for that.
Cool. Thanks, Mayor Adele. Then let me quickly introduce, but it's hard to be quick about some amazing accomplishments. But Mayor Pro Tem of West Covina, Brian Tabatabai. Brian is a graduate of UCLA, but we're still friends. I'm just kidding. And I just have like special place in my heart for Brian because he and I met when Brian was thinking about like how can he help improve housing and end homelessness in his community of West Covina. And I was at that time working at Everyone In. And Brian, over a summer when he wasn't teaching at that time El Monte school district, he took these advocacy like Zooms about the issue. And one of the things we talked about as people from the area was what West Covina was like, and trying to close the gap, particularly on racial injustice. And, West Covina might be known as a sundown town. We have several of those in our area, and Brian and I talked quite extensively about that. So when I think about Brian and all that he brings to the table, among other things, it's pretty impressive. But yeah, he's a graduate of UCLA. He works a lot with young people. Brian actually started as a teacher in Baldwin Park, working with students with special needs. Again, another pretty important skill set, heart set to bring to the table. And after working for a few years as an elementary school teacher, he transferred to El Monte's Union High School District, which is the opposite of the elementary school district. And the subjects Brian teaches, social studies and English, but he also works as a coach and in a coaching capacity on the basketball field and the football field. And has actually had some really impressive wins with the football team, which shows that you're inspiring young people and showing them how to rock it. And just want to thank you, Brian, and give you this time to give you an additional space for an introduction.
Oh, thank you. I really want to say what an honor it is to be here and to have LA Forward in the San Gabriel Valley. I know when I first met Allison, I was a longtime renter myself, my wife and I, and you move into a suburb and it's all about homeowners. And as a renter, as a longtime renter, and I never really felt like I even had the right to have a voice in city government, and that was a wrong mindset. And so one of the things I wanted to make sure is when I ran for council and I got elected is that renters knew that not only do they have a voice, but they have an important voice in community. And so I wanted to make sure that I was advocating for that. What brought me to this space was, as a teacher during the pandemic, my students in El Monte were suffering. They were the essential workers. They were living in high density not in West Covina, we're sprawled out, right? You know, we have space. But during COVID, my students who were living in high density, were essential workers, living in multi-generational homes, were having deaths. I was getting emails every day about deaths that were happening in my students' homes. And you know, that was something that really drives me still. One of the things, you know, I know Mayor Adele Andrade-Stadler was saying about what they did. We did the opposite. We made a decision to try to create our own health department. And it was so enraging to me because this money that we should have been using to support our community, instead, we really made a decision to try to take resources away from spaces like El Monte, Alhambra, spaces where there was a lot of density and people were dying. And you know, so I fought hard against that. And again, it's kind of been my a driver for me, is that there are so many folks in our community that have not been represented. You know, I know we only have a third of our community as renters, but we have the people that work in our community that have not been able to live in our community. And I kind of mentioned it before, you know, we have teachers, we have nurses, we have, you know, the staff that works in our city hall that can't live in West Covina. And that really is a tragedy, and it's something that, you know, we really need to fix.
So let's go ahead and get into that then, right? Because I mean, we've got, you know, we've got a few different like compare contrasts, like always in a productive, positive way. So let's go ahead and start with the protections piece, right? When we think of tenant protections. Mayor Adele, I'll start with you. I'll give you 3 minutes. And this isn't because it's campaigny, but like just to try and keep us on track. But, you know, and this is, you know, there are going to be a few questions here, but, you know, it's all about protections, right? This is the P we're going with first.
Yeah, and no worries. I was already elected in 2022, so you know I'm not afraid of anything right now. But one of the first things that, and again, it's about listening to our community. And what we were able to do is listen to our community. And there were council members who were listening to our community because we made this huge change in the people who were on the dais. And it started in 2018 when I was first elected, and then in 2019, because I knew we needed to put an inclusionary housing ordinance in place. We are one of the first cities that ran with that. We had to wrestle for the percentage because myself and Councilwoman Lee wanted 20%. We were only able to wrestle 15 with the other council members that were there. It was, remember, Alhambra was a, you know, we have a lot of investors in our housing, right? So a lot of the housing that has gone on for years and years has been more expensive housing. So we're working with that as the background and the backdrop of my beautiful city that I love very, very much. So the inclusionary housing was a first order of business. That is incredible because more cities are now doing that. In addition to that, I mentioned that we put that emergency order in to stop any kind of, you know, tenant evictions. And then, of course, the state and the county are just incredible, you know, creating these stronger programs. But I think what we're seeing is just because COVID is behind us, and some of those protections have been removed, it doesn't mean the councils have to be let go, right? And I think that they have to relax, because they don't, because then we saw an increase in evictions, right? And I think it's really critical that we have to work with our, I hate to refer to them as mom and pop, but it's the only way I can describe the difference between a mom and pop landlord and somebody who is outside the country, who is an investor for our city, who is running their rental property, right? So the mom and pop need the support. And certainly they did receive it from the state. They could apply, but I think things were a little difficult for them. I think it's critical we continue to have everybody at the table as we move forward to keep some of those protections in place, as we figure out our housing element and the zoning and how that is going to also help us. Thank you.
Great, thank you. And just for folks a little bit outside of Alhambra, there was recently an eviction moratorium for renovations, which is a significant loophole in the state law, Tenant Protection Act of 2019, that very few cities have. So Alhambra has crafted an urgency ordinance, which went into place immediately, and they will be working over the next few months to craft something permanent. So thank you, Mayor Adele. All right, so Brian, you are in West Covina. What kind of protections are you trying to work on? Are you hoping to get through there in West Covina?
Yeah, in terms of what or let me rephrase that, I really try to do is just even getting people who are in danger of being evicted access to funds to keep them in their apartments. It's something, we have some ARPA funds that are currently scheduled to continue to go to this idea of building a health department, about $300,000. And so, this is something that I've been speaking with our assistant city manager about. And there are a few council members that I think are interested in this. It is one of our priorities, actually, that we set as a council is for rental assistance to keep people housed. And so, these are short-term funds, though, right? We have a lot of seniors, like you said, that are at risk of eviction. And because as a city, we do not have rent control, rent stabilization. So, that means the rents can go up 10%. And if you are on a fixed income, and even if you're not on fixed income, wages have not ever, right, been able to match, right, those 10% increases. And so I think, not only as a city, but almost for cities like ours, it almost has to come from the state. I think we talk about things like local control, but there are some cities that are never going to get there. One example, before I was elected, I was speaking on ADUs, and I was trying to get our city, we had a 25-foot setback rule to build an ADU.
Okay, so describe or very quickly tell
go.
us, what is an ADU? Because right? I mean, it should be a no-brainer for these. But
Right.
What's an ADU?
Some people call them granny flats. It's accessory dwelling unit. It's basically being able to build more housing on your property. And so I was pushing, right, the council at the time, and I could see what the state was doing. And the whole idea was, hey, why don't we, as City of West Covina, we can be innovators, we can get ahead of this. We understand what the tea leaves are saying. And I pushed, and we couldn't get it. Luckily Governor Newsom signed, and now, we were forced, right, to 5-foot setback from the back, right, from the side. But again, like cities like West Covina that have been so hesitant, I think this is why it's so important that the state also says, look, we have some cities that are never going to push these things. So as a state, right, these are things we need to do, and because it's for the best of all the community.
Thanks, Brian. Thanks for that answer, because I'll just give a quick shorthand for our audience. What Brian was talking about in terms of zoning, it's like what you allow for a city to build, right? And again, some of these should be no-brainers, but they aren't. But then the other thing I just wanted to refer back to, Brian, was the ARPA funds. So these are the American Rescue Act funds, sort of the the COVID injection money that went to cities. And first, it's actually amazing how many cities are sitting on ARPA funds, not yet spent. Two, I don't know if it's ironic or what to say about using ARPA funds to start your own health department when you're kind of in a COVID denial footing. So I don't know what to say about that. But I also like, I think, $300,000, think about how many households you can save with that. But I always lift up, and I say this to the policymakers on this call, including our guests, you are giving a subsidy to somebody's business. So if that's what you're going to do, make sure at the very minimum, you have some sort of assurance of long-term preservation of the tenant in place to get that subsidy, and then do a math of like how many households you can do. Because I know one city in our area set up rental assistance. Many of us advocated for them to do something else, but they set up I think $500,000 or $1 million in rental assistance, the city of Claremont. But there's very little oversight. It's been put to a staffer who's already kind of overworked. It's a lot of money to have unchecked, and without assurances on the other end that the landlord won't turn around and then, right? So just a consideration, but that's a lot of money. And those advocates on the Zoom here, check your city council agendas for these ARPA funds. They're usually in the consent calendar, or ask your council member if your cities have gone through their ARPA funds and what their plans are for those funds. Because another possibility would be putting them to preserving affordable housing, particularly if you have units at risk, and having the city approach them to buy. Right. Which gets me actually to my next question. When you think about, you do have, both of your cities are very interesting in that they do have existing resources in terms of existing affordable housing. Knowing that it's more expensive to preserve, or excuse me, to build rather than preserve, are you looking at any strategies, or have you thought about any strategies as how those units can be preserved? And Adele, I'll go ahead and start with you.
Yeah, I appreciate the question because so much of our housing stock is the older home, we have a large number of houses that are being rented out, and the houses, they've been around for a number of years, and we do have certain dollars that HUD gives us to redo homes and help with folks who need rehabilitation or rehab in the homes. And it's quite expensive, but I think it's worth looking into those a lot more, because I think that that's, you want to make sure that you're keeping the stock healthy, right? The housing is healthy. It doesn't have anything that is harmful to the tenants. If you can ask that question one more time, so you can help lead me a little bit further than just the rehabilitation for preserving homes.
Sure. So some of the buildings in your cities have expiring covenants. They're 55-year, right?
Yes.
So, some of the strategies could be a community land trust, trying to coordinate working with the community land trust. We have La Casa, which is the county authority that's been created by the state to not only preserve and produce housing, but also to help tenants in a way that we don't have out this way. But there are details to be filled in, like the funding. But I was just wondering, Mayor Adele, and I guess I'll ask a more pointed question. So has the city looked at resources? And also, at a recent city council meeting, the public safety and police budget was on the, the budget was increased 5%, which was a lot of money. So when I think about public safety and budgets, right? And what do we mean by public safety? Could you ever envision a time, maybe, if you're not able to access other resources to preserve these things, approaching the council with the same confidence as a 5% budget increase is the police.
Oh yeah, that's a really strong ask. I do know that at one point we actually asked for a list of all the housing that had the covenants and when they were going to be up, because that's really where the start is, right? You mentioned the 215 deed units that are at risk, and I think that's where we need to start once again, because that is where we can have a great effect on making sure that whatever is going up, that we get in front of that so that that doesn't happen. Yes, you're right. Our police department, I don't mean to compare them to teachers, but when I was a Alhambra board member, our teachers were the largest they were the largest part of our budget, as they should have been. Our police department and our fire department, those are our public safety. They tend to be the largest budgets as well. And I'm not comparing, although I'd like to compare the firefighters to you guys, I'm not comparing them necessarily with the teachers. However, it is how cities are driven to some degree. And then in addition to that, Los Angeles pays a lot for their police department. So what we're seeing a lot of police departments, a lot of police officers train with us and then they're gone. So we're trying to stay within that, at the risk of sounding like, yeah, you like heavy police department. But it really is a very difficult thing to continue to keep them in our city. Yeah, that's probably the.
Thanks, Mayor Adele. Like a little bit extra time, so I gave you a little bit extra
Oh,
par.
thanks.
So, so thank
That's
you.
okay.
So yeah, Brian, sort of similar question to you. You know, when you think about preserving housing in West Covina, and knowing that it's at least in the housing element as a program, what are you doing to preserve these existing units versus trying to build more?
Yeah, I think again, for us, this is something that we've been behind the curve on, and one of the things as a city that we really need to improve is on our collaboration with the county, with these other agencies. I know you just mentioned La Casa, and I look at what some other communities have done in partnerships with each other. We've really acted as if we are on an island, and so that has made it difficult, right? Because we've attempted to do a lot of things just with our own funds, right? With our own just general funds, even not even taking advantage of a lot of monies available by the state, and so that's something that we really attempting to try to get us as a council to do more of, and I think again though it part of it is the culture of West Covina, which has been very much about and you mentioned it early on about some of the history of West Covina. It is, we have viewed ourselves as this island. Now, one of the things that we have done, because we are so single family home orientated, right? About 70% of our residents are living in single family homes, is we do have a housing preservation loan program, $25,000 interest-free loans that, depending on income, and really geared for a lot of our elderly folks who, have their homes, but now because they are on fixed income, aren't able to maybe make those repairs, repair the roof, right? Getting new energy efficient windows. Many of our older homes have no central air, right? And we just recently increased the program from $10,000 to $25,000. We're looking to even increase it more, because again, we do have older housing stock in terms of single family homes. and to preserve those, right? And to allow people to stay housed in those. Again, when we're talking about our homeless population and we're talking about it being elderly and increasing, and in West Covina having that issue, right, with our elder population. So this is one way we've tried to preserve already existing housing in the single family housing market.
So thank you for that response, because that's, I don't think a lot of people know that most cities have in their housing element a program specifically for low income homeowners with the specific directives that Brian talked about, right? Really targeting people to keep them in ownership of their home and with it in a safe condition, and actually ideally aging in place when you look at some of the modifications that can be paid for by these programs. I would just say to our electeds, both Mayor Adele and Mayor Bryant, and you've heard this suggestion from me before, I would urge you to start considering also a similar program for multifamily buildings where it literally is that mom and pop who is like struggling to keep the place up, offering below market rents, wants to keep the building. And as we have more community land trusts in the area, we could envision a scenario of some of that assistance being, hey, maybe this gets turned over to a community land trust. And I don't mean to be flippant about ownership of property, but when I think about opportunities, solutions, and recognizable patterns, I think we should start thinking about offering these same subsidies to like legit small, non-corporate, right, tenancies, because you can get different types of agreements, with tenants and landlords, right? So I appreciate your answers. Thank you. Then the last set of questions before I do allow some time from our audience. So we talked some about policy and the what ifs and the what ares. I would be really curious to know from you both and observations about like the hows or what's working, whether it's successful campaigns that have come to you at city council, or if there have been ways that you yourselves have helped to change the minds of difficult council members, which would also be very helpful for us as advocates. What meaningful advice would you give us in terms of, what should we be trying? What avenues of change or data should we be trying? What do we do with the data resistant? Because, not to tell tales out of school, but you do both have insight into your colleagues and things that can change their minds or we can leverage that perhaps we don't. So with that, Mayor Adele, I'd like you to start. Thank you.
Everybody has stories, and I think stories are so important to explain or to share, rather. And when you have families who are at the mic asking for help, which we do almost each and every council meeting, when they're asking for help because things are happening, I don't think there's any greater way of moving council from maybe a council person who has no experience having in their background a family member that may have been, struggling, or a grandparent or any of that. But when you see that in front of you, it's so much harder. When you have an elected official come in and grandstand about an issue, it's a little harder to get people to move from that. And I'm an elected official myself, and I'm been known to grandstand. So I'm not trying to kick us all, but it really does matter when you have coalitions of that are working together to make things change. And so I think that is for me, that's the perfect pressure. I'll give you an example. You know, our families, we have a lot of families who are undocumented or in different status, and they need a lot of assistance, and they need a lot of guidance, and they're a little bit more, not fragile, but they are sort of in that, you know, they still kind of have to hide a little bit, and they don't always get what their need, you know, their needs. So especially with respect to housing, they're a little bit more, oh, what's that word there? And so having a mixture of families coming up and talking to us about their needs for housing, and their children go to our school district, I, I, I can't see a stronger argument for moving anyone, unless these people just don't care. In which case you need to change your council members, because we are there, voted in by the people. We're not voted in by staff. We're not voted in by city managers. We're voted by the people. And you have to listen to them, and they are the ones who are our guides. Thanks.
Thank you, Mayor Adele. Thank you. Yeah, same question, Brian. Yeah, like, how do you move the needle? Particularly you, like, I'll just say we've got some people on this call from San Dimas, which I know is another like spicy city council in terms of housing issues. So like, you know, particularly with that lens, being maybe maybe a minority voice on housing issues on your council. Yeah, how are you moving people, and what advice would you give to advocates?
No, I think what Mayor Adele Andrade-Stadler just said is how important those stories are, because I have seen movement. You know, just recently, you know, we toured Pasadena, and we looked at all their affordable housing developments and how they got pieced together. Um, and the mayor, Mayor Rosario Diaz, and Council Member Oli Cantos joined on that tour, you know, and, you know, I think especially as, you know, we've been, you know, getting messages from a lot of our elderly that are facing eviction. I think that story has moved a lot of people, and made people understand the need. And so, you know, I was really heartened to see them this weekend, and just the conversations we've started to have. And so I think that, again, telling those stories, you know, and I think one piece that's kind of been missing as well, and, you know, we've been talking about, is how much of our workforce, again, that makes our lives, you know, when the first person my son meets in the morning is the cafeteria lady giving him breakfast at Orangewood Elementary School. She should be able to live in West Covina. And when you showed those numbers, she can't. And you know, when we look at funding, you know, market rate developers, yeah, they want to come to West Covina. 100% affordable, right? They'll come to West Covina. But that middle, right, for the first or second year teacher, right? You know, my wife and I, you know, we're both veteran teachers. We both are at the end of the pay scale. We could not buy our home today in West Covina, right? And so, you know, there's so much of that. And I think those stories need to be told. You know, when we look at, you know, the levels, right? One thing people need to focus on is income. Means people who are working to make our communities thrive. And really, it's up to us as a community to make sure everyone who is making our community thrive is also able to live in our community, right? Because that takes care of a lot of other issues when we're talking about climate, when we're talking about public safety, right? Because if you are able to live in the community and work in the community, then, you know, all of those other issues really kind of get taken care of, and you bring a stronger community. And so I think as more of these stories are coming out, as we're seeing how many people that we've always respected as a society, the nurses, the teachers, the cafeteria worker, are facing homelessness, right? Then people are like, oh my goodness, how did we let it get this far, right? And why are we not providing? Why are they not living in our community? And so I think that's started to move quite a few people, and I'm really optimistic. I don't think any of us would be serving in the way we do if we didn't have the hope that things are going to continue to improve.
Okay, so that's a good place for me to end my questioning on, because I want to give a good bit of time, about 10 minutes for Q&A, but I'll end this question to you both, and I want you to keep it to a minute. I'm actually going to set my timer on, because you looked forward. So are there any housing examples or programs or policies that you have seen that are working? And it's a little bit of a lightning round, so I'm going to give you a minute. So, before we go to the audience questions. So is there a program, a policy, et cetera, that you've seen, whether in your city or elsewhere, that's working? Mayor Adele, let you go first.
So a program that is working, well, I will say that you have to have a lot of programming together, not just one program. So there's multiple people helping to achieve a particular policy, like providing affordable housing, right? As well as I, that we just broke ground on our first 100% affordable housing that we're putting in. Yeah, we're squeezing it in because we don't have, the city does not have a lot of land, but we're squeezing it in between parking lots and another parking lot. And we're going to be providing that with a nonprofit that is going to be helping as well. That would not have happened without, the beginning of the San Gabriel Valley Housing Trust. So being a member of that, and my city manager saw that I was interested in this area, that I've been on that since its inception, and working very hard to try and get and help others in the San Gabriel Valley as well. So I think the by having those trusts, those are incredibly important. And then reaching with the county, of course, out of Hilda Solis's powerhouse, drive to help those that most need it. She's a mentor of mine. I worked for her for 5 years. That is an incredible partnership, and along with the state. So is there one policy? I think the first policy for all cities is getting an inclusionary housing ordinance, because that automatically throws it into that gives the developer no choice, right? You got to support it by a percentage. It may be a small percentage at first, but it is. And then you move to make that percentage larger. And then I think that policy can be better. And I will end with that.
Cool. Thanks, Mayor Adele. And remind me again, that unit the building that you're breaking ground on, how many units is it?
It's only 44. I wish it was bigger. We have another one, but all the entitlements have gone through. It is really hard to get this done. We've been doing this since 2019. And look at us.
No, that's great. And 44 units is better than nothing. So thank you for that. So inclusionary housing. All right. So Brian, what say you? What policy or practice or whatever do you see working? Give you a minute.
Yeah. No. Just again, touring Pasadena and seeing what Pasadena has done with the different developments, affordability. But one thing I think in terms of policy, and this is something I noticed, Pasadena, they really were magicians in the way they took different grants and different funding sources to be able to build a lot of these affordable housing units. And I think that's one thing on the state level. We need to be able to streamline the funding to make again, to build the affordable housing, the missing middle housing, right? And that way, a lot of these developers who right now are only doing market rate, well, you can bring them in once they see that there's the funding is so much easier to access. Then you can, right, get more developers to want to do all these different variety of housings. And so I think as a state, we've done a really great job in land use ordinances and making more land available for housing. I think we need to do a better job in creating the money, so it's not so difficult to get the tax credits and the bonds, and just all, again, to see what the people in Pasadena did. I mean, really just sorcery with how they put it together. They did it though; it was fantastic. But we need to make it so people don't have to perform miracles.
Okay, very good. Thank you both for your answers. And I would like to allow 10 minutes for Q&A from our audience, trying to keep it reasonable, but so I already see a hand from Lauren. So Lauren, go ahead, please.
Right. Thank you to the panelists. This is very interesting discussion. But one thing we haven't touched on when we talk about housing and affordable housing and building is who gets access to these units. And I'd be interested in hearing from both of you if you've encountered issues of racial discrimination when it comes to renting, or if these buildings are ready for seniors or those who are disabled or aging. Housing is not a one size fits all. And I, for one, am not seeing apartment blocks being built that accommodate people with different physical needs. And, and otherwise, we also know that anti-queer stuff is happening, that people are being discriminated against race, and also too, the barrier to get into rental housing with the pass along fees when it comes to applications. These are all things that impact people that nobody's talking about. And I'd like to hear your experience with how you counter these negative impacts.
So I'm so glad you asked that question. Having the County of Los Angeles as part of our partnership for this one supportive housing that we're doing includes Section 8. So once you bring in the county, then that gives that flexibility for how and who and when they come in. It was a question I asked my city manager. We're still looking into exactly who, but if there's a long list of Section 8, and so a certain number of Section 8 will get into our supportive housing. We also looked at, believe it or not, we've looked at potentially having those with disability, intellectual disability. So, as a portion of that as well. And then in addition to that, of course, a senior component. But we have to sort of be cautious about selecting, as you mentioned, because you don't want to discriminate. When you identify a certain group, I think that allows you, as long as that group falls into that that particular guideline, you're okay with having that group be part of the entire thing. But you have to be very cautious about that. Discrimination, well, we have a great rapport with our HUD funded, I think I just mentioned it, what was it, our housing rights, and they collect all that data. If somebody comes in and says that they've been found to have, they've not been allowed to rent because they feel that there's discrimination, we have that on paper. And the housing rights folks hand that off to the appropriate people. So yeah, it happens.
Thank
Yeah,
you for
and
that response. Yeah.
yeah, and I'll be real quick because I think one population that is discriminated against quite a bit are single mothers with teenage kids. And a lot of landlords, if you have a teenage child, especially a teenage boy, especially a teenage boy of color, um, will discriminate. And I know we have laws to protect, but we also have to understand that in order to um, right enforce a law, that takes time, that takes resources for the individual, right, for that family that's been discriminated against. And so one of the things I know that we've been looking at is a lot of the affordable housing that people have wanted to build in our city has been just focused on seniors. But because politically, if you help seniors, that tends to be the most palatable for folks. But we have families, and we have families, that maybe have suffered from domestic violence, and so now you have, these single parents with their kids. That oftentimes, if you have a teenage child, that teenage child can't come with you into, if you're trying to find sanctuary from domestic violence. A lot of these places for domestic violence victims only take children, and so again, I think that we need to make sure that any affordable housing we are building really takes into account who are the folks that are being denied a lot of our housing. And so you have, again, this group. As a high school teacher, right, we have our homeless population, right, and some of our kids are homeless because of a domestic violence situation, and they couldn't go with their mother, but they had to themselves leave the domestic violence themselves, right? And so again, that's a population we need to definitely continue to be, front of mind. But also, I think as a state, we need to create more avenues for them.
Great, thank you. Do we have another question from our audience? Looking for raised hands. Okay. Well, with that, I would definitely encourage everyone to stay in touch. Things are moving and changing in terms of like elections, but also just housing projects, being supported or not. Again, I made reference to 740 East Foothill out in Laverne, San Dimas. We need folks to be supportive. Oh, you know what? I see one hand up. Lexine, please share your question.
All right. Hi everyone. Sorry, can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. So hi, and thanks a lot to the speakers. One question I had, because you mentioned you both have experience being on councils with maybe council members who do not see the housing issue the same way that you do. And I would imagine that, like I've encountered in my own community in Temple City and the surrounding communities, Arcadia and other parts of the West San Gabriel Valley, that you've also encountered opposition to housing from residents. And I was wondering if you could speak a little bit about, as an elected official, and of course, you're elected to represent everyone, so that includes those people too. Like, how do you handle, what's your philosophy on handling those types of situations? And have you seen cases where, I know you talked about having people come in and speak, but have you seen cases where you've seen opposition really persuaded, or do you think it's more of a focus on really strengthening the support or some combination of both? I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
So I guess I'll take it first. Years ago, I saw this huge uprising, and I'm not going to mention the city because I'll embarrass them. But an uprising where they actually had, I'm sorry, Allison, and I was astonished at how angry people were. And I was running a Democratic Club meeting, and that we were talking about the issue, and these were some strong people who were solid, good-hearted, good-natured folks who did not want that in their neighborhood. And I was so taken aback by it. And this is years ago, because I've been here for a while. And I always remembered that. And I thought to myself, as we were creating, because we have another supportive housing that we're hoping to get started, and we do a lot of outreach. First of all, we did a lot of outreach for this one that's going first, but I actually wanted one that's going to go across the street from a high school and across the street from City Hall. And it'll probably be a little more challenging with that one, but we're ready for it, because I think if COVID taught us anything, is that people are suffering, and people continue to suffer, and people lose their jobs, and people are hurting, and we have the middle that Councilman Calderon Tabatabai was talking about. I mean, this is an incredible thing that is happening all over California. It's too expensive to live here. So, there's a little bit of a fight that council members have to put up with, and they have to be strong about it and not worry about not being elected the next time around. Not worry so much about that. And worry more about where the needs of our constituents are. Once again, we are elected by our constituents. If the constituents in your district don't like it, well then, think of another place where it needs to be, where everybody is happy with it, but don't not do it. And I think that things have changed a little bit in that area. I mean, we're seeing it daily. So thank you.
Yeah, I want to piggyback on that. There is an urgency. And when I think of constituents, again, I can't only think of the people who live in the community. I have to think about the people who make our community work. And if you have people who work and give their lives to the community, and then have to drive an hour and a half to the Inland Empire to go home. And what about their children, right? Their child should have the same privileges that my child has. And so what better than someone who's already said, I want to work in your community, I believe in your community, than providing them the housing to live in the community as well. And so I understand that the people who already live in our city, and but my thing, and when I do, and I talk to everybody as much as I can, and I outreach, and I'm on social media, and I do all of those things, sometimes to my detriment probably, but it's important, right, that we tell the stories of everybody, and residents. One thing too, when these projects get built, oftentimes the residents, all those fears they had, they realize, oh no, there was nothing to be fearful of. I'm seeing what happened in Hacienda Heights with that permanent supportive housing development that's going to happen, that Supervisor Solis. It's going to be a great project. I've known that Motel 6 since I was, a high school kid, younger, right? And the types of things that used to happen there to people, people were being exploited there. People were being harmed there. There was a lot of trauma there. Now that's actually going to be a space of repair, a space of bringing people back and giving them that permanent supportive housing, and it's going to enhance the community. Now, the community right now doesn't know that, just like in San Dimas and Laverne, they don't know that. But once it's built and people are strong enough to build it, then people will be like, oh, I'm so glad. I'm so glad that that's here now, because it has enhanced our community. It's enhanced our way of life, our quality of life, and we've helped people. And you know, I think just sometimes it takes the strength of people to say, you know, I understand you're gonna hate what we're doing right now, and maybe you don't see it, but we have the strength in ourselves to push it forward, even if it means losing an election.
Well, thank you for those answers. And just looking at the time, I think this is a good way to wrap up, because this is what stinks. It has to be a long game for us too, right? We have to like stick it out. And it also says to me, we need to run folks for councils. So, speak with my colleague Godfrey and I about that, and continue to make change. So Godfrey, let's go ahead and pull up the last two slides. So I want to thank, first of all, I want to thank our guests for giving us their time. And I'm going to make a few of our announcements, but I'm going to open the space to some other people to make their announcements. So the two upcoming events that LA Forward has, the first is a community picnic. We're trying to do it, before it gets too hot. This is being really led by our San Gabriel Valley Learning Cohort, a group of folks who've come together over the last 6 months. So the information's there. We do need you to RSVP because it is a potluck. So we do have like some things to bring, but it's a low lift because it's probably gonna be very warm. Also, we'll have details on the location. And then the other thing we'd like to invite you to is think of it as the last day of a rockin' class. Our San Gabriel Valley cohort is going to be pitching their various housing justice policy ideas. And they're all incredibly exciting. You can join us in person in Baldwin Park, or you can join us via Zoom in either event. Please make sure you RSVP. And with that, I'll open it up to see if anyone else has any announcements, events they would like to share with the community in the last few minutes. Yeah, Julie Salazar, and then Constantine Anthony. Go ahead, Julie.
Hi, everybody. I know that you were talking about the 740 project here in San Dimas, and I had received some information that the supervisor's office needs some a little nudge by all of us to to put the housing on the agenda for as soon as July's meeting, if that's possible, because we've heard that she's going to postpone putting it on the agenda to create a waiting game that's going to take as long as she thinks she can outlast the support for the project. So I think we need people to write in, maybe send a little note off, ask that this be front and center, and there should be a consideration to put it back on the agenda.
Awesome, Julie. Thank you very much for that. We can send information out to folks. And Constantine, yes, please.
Oh, there I am. Okay. Hello, my name is Constantine Anthony. I am the mayor of the city of Burbank, and I'm doing a meet and greet on Saturday at 5 o'clock at a local pharmacy here. I'll put it in the chat for you. We're talking about, the supervisor for San Dimas, and that is the seat that I'm currently running for. So if anyone would like to come out to Burbank, please join us at 5 o'clock. I'm also looking for folks to host some meet and greets in the San Gabriel Valley. Thank you all.
Great. Thank you, Constantine. Anyone else?
Well, yeah, I'll go ahead and jump in. So, we've talked a lot about, the housing, and that really is priority one for me. And because I think that there's more that needs to be done in the state, and our area, the San Gabriel Valley, I don't think um, has a strong presence in the state legislature pushing these types of things. I am running for state assembly in Assembly District 48, which encompasses West Covina, Baldwin Park, Glendora, Duarte, Azusa, Irwindale, unincorporated, Charter Oak, and again, the move for housing, especially that missing middle, is really something as a state. I think we really need to address that. So that way, again, if you work in a community, you should be able to live in that community. And so, again, hopefully, all of you, Brian, Tabatabai.com to see what's going on with me. I'll go ahead and put that in the chat. But if you believe in housing, if you believe in Medicare for all, if you're a public school advocate like I am, if you want to take care of the climate emergency, then I'm the person to represent you in the San Gabriel Valley. So thank you.
I'll jump in just to announce that on Thursday, September 21st, from 6 o'clock to 9 o'clock, Active SGV, which I know is a great organization, and LA Forward appreciates Active SGV. They are the folks that work very tirelessly on issues of green space and pedestrian safety and bikes and all that other wonderful things we want for our cities. The event's going to be at the Los Angeles County Arboretum and Botanical Garden in Arcadia. All proceeds will go back to the work, which their work is 626 Golden Streets. I know all the city folks on here want them to visit 626 Golden Streets on your main street. Please, I'll put this in the chat, but I'm also being honored that evening for their Noche de las Luminarias, and it's a great group that this group would be wonderful connecting with. It's sort of the same sort of space, so I look forward to seeing you all there. Active SGV, thanks. And thanks again, always learning from you, Allison. It's been an honor to be part of this, and thank you for continuing to educate me in the area of housing. Appreciate it.
Oh,
Yes, not.
yeah, go for it, Brian.
Yeah, no, the same, Allison. You have, in terms of tenants' rights, in terms of housing advocacy, you've been a leader in the San Gabriel Valley. When I just started, these organizations really were not vibrant, and you've brought them. You've been a leader, and we're better for it. So thank you for having us on here. Tonight was fantastic, but all the work you've been doing just is tremendous. So just want to make sure you know how much you mean to all of us in the San Gabriel Valley.
That is so nice, Brian. Thank you. And I appreciate everyone. Everyone on this call is doing things in their cities and towns that matter. And even if it doesn't feel like it is mattering, and it's helping to change the narrative. And with that, I just want to say thank you, everyone. You've given us a great amount of time on a hot Thursday evening. Please keep in touch. Please join future events. Please support candidates who want to make change. And with that, I want to say thanks, everyone. And I hope everyone has a great evening. Look forward to seeing you again soon.